Welcome to Rising Up for Justice, a special weekly series presented by Rising Up with Sonali, an independently produced, subscriber-supported program syndicated to radio stations, free speech TV, and podcast platforms. I'm Sonali Kolhatkar, host and executive producer. Our nation and our world is overrun by billionaires and bigots, but they are few and we are many. On this series, exclusive to subscribers of Rising Up with Sonali and viewers of Free Speech TV, we'll hear from organizers in the movements for social justice and dig into the nuts and bolts of values, strategies, tactics, narratives, and building power. This week, my guest is Unai Montes-Irueste, the Media Strategy Director for People's Action and People's Action Institute. Prior to taking on this role, Unai consulted for ๊mantrə, a public affairs firm he co-founded. He also served as narrative and strategic communications director for Housing California and has had many other roles. Welcome to the program, Unai.
Thank you for having me today. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you so much for joining us. People's Action is an organization that many might have heard of. It's actually, I understand, a coalition of groups around the country and in many, many different states. It's been around for 50 years, and from what I gather, it is focused on issue-based fights, particularly through the electoral process, but not necessarily exclusively. Is that relatively accurate? How do you describe People's Action?
Yeah, of course. Well, thank you again. People's Action and our sister organization, our 501c3 sister People's Action Institute, are national networks, right? And those networks consist of what we like to call power building groups or grassroots affiliates. Right. And so we're basically starting where folks are in more than 80 organizations all across the country. And in those communities, folks are identifying the issues that matter most to them. And what, of course, we've seen, as you've indicated in your introduction, is that there are some common threads throughout, right? A lot of challenges with affordability, a lot of challenges with healthcare, a lot of challenges with climate justice and housing. And those things have helped, again, build out robust issue campaigns. And those robust issue campaigns live through local organizing and then also national organizing. Again, People's Action, gets to participate in advocacy coming from a place of organizing, coming from a place of networks. And we get to also do the fun stuff as a C4 of also helping to identify folks who could become elected leaders, right? So we really believe that those who are closest to the problem are closest to the solution. And so we should be electing working class folks. We should be electing folks who are directly impacted by systems that are not serving the needs of our people. And so that's something that we get to do with our C4, in addition to the things that we get to do with our C3.
So you connect local organizing from a national perspective to issues that matter to everybody. Is that what, and maybe what provide the kind of infrastructure needs that local organizers have?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're obviously doing our long arc is the long arc of like movement history, right? So as you noted, we were born, 2 generations ago. So we belong to that group of civil rights movement organizers who were looking at problems like redlining, right? So, I'm actually talking to you from Chicago right now, and People's Action has an office here in Chicago. We were born in Chicago and became a national presence, again, identifying those common threads throughout communities. But that story that begins locally, I think, is everyone's story into organizing, right? When Gail, Sincata, and Shell Trap 50 years ago were like facing redlining in Chicago, and they were taking on the forces of redlining in Chicago, the banks that were driving redlining in Chicago, the broken systems and bad public policies that were driving this discriminatory policy. They then opened up possibilities that then turned into national legislation, right? So we have the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act and the Community Reinvestment Act that come directly out of that effort, right? And so again, the Community Reinvestment Act and the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act are coming up on, again, 50-year anniversary periods in our current time. And those pieces of legislation couldn't continue to be more true as we look to a homes guarantee, right? As we look to where we need to be to meet everyone's basic needs. And again, the 1.0 strategy is really identifying the things that stand in our way and to build power, to build the things that we need, and then to make sure that we are serving everyone in our communities and tying our communities together in a way that we're meeting everyone's needs all across the country, because we all share those same basic needs. And that becomes a sustaining model for us.
Redlining was not just an issue in Chicago, it was all over the country. And the solutions that came out of a Chicago fight, of course, if they're federally based solutions and policies and legislation, impact everybody. Would you say that the sort of basic progressive bread and butter issues are people's actions goals? Housing, wages, basic needs and necessities that ought to be part of our social contract with our government, with our democratically elected government, but of course are not?
Yes. I mean, I think, again, if we were to go around on any street corner anywhere, whether we're in suburban, rural, or urban America, and ask people what are the pressures that are weighing on them today, people would be talking about healthcare, right? They would be talking about the defunding of Medicaid, the defunding of Medicare. They would be talking about their premiums going up. They'd be talking about frustration with what they feel as, a political system that's not meeting their needs, a corporate system that is basically, prioritizing profit over care. They would be looking at housing. They'd be talking about the rent being too high. They would be talking about not being able to afford a mortgage and not seeing the American dream as tenable in their lifetime. They would be talking about utility rates going up. And that conversation about utility rates going up would lead them to a conversation about how they're seeing major data centers that are owned by billionaires and operated by multinational corporations being the recipients of subsidies not only from public dollars from the government, but also like every single time somebody's paying a monthly bill, they are subsidizing a billionaire's data center project, right? And we're seeing frustration around those cost of living issues, those affordability issues, but also really one of the things that we've done successfully from the beginning is helping people identify those villains. There are people that aren't necessarily driving these bad decisions and these bad places where we are now, and corporations that are doing the same, and being able to identify those folks and to build power to take those folks on is part of the model of winning. And it's also part of the model of understanding what democracy is supposed to be, right? We talk a lot about democracy in very abstract terms, but democracy is a very simple concept. It is a we the people concept. It is a by, for, and of the people concept. And that needs to be true for our economy. It needs to be true for the ways that we're meeting our basic needs. And it needs to be true for the way that we're making decisions about what we want to see in the future. Not only, addressing the injustices in the present and addressing the inequities in the present, but we have a direction for where we want to be as a people. And we're making those leaps of faith every single day. Every single time somebody goes to college, every single time that somebody starts a business, every single time that somebody gets up, out of bed in the morning, knowing that it's going to be hard to work 2-3 jobs just to put food on the table and keep the lights on. People are making giant leaps of faith, as you said, investing in a social contract, knowing that they and their neighbors are doing their best, and knowing that someone is actually not doing their best, but gaming the system and working against them. So we're giving the people the reminder that they are the ones that have the power. We are the ones that are in control, and we are the ones that get to dictate what we think our lives should look like, and what we think our children's lives should look like, and what we think our country's trajectory should be.
So what are the main strategies that People's Action uses to achieve this? You mentioned, electoral strategies. I imagine that's through identifying people from local actors from the community who are running in elections, which these days is becoming more and more realistic and actually bearing fruit in ways that I think the left might not have imagined 5 years ago. But does it also include things like ballot measures or local fights or, pressure from the outside in? What are those main strategies that People's Action uses?
Yeah, I mean, again, the strategy is to start from a place of organizing and building power, and then to work through ecosystems in which power plays out, right? I mean, as you named, we are existing in a moment right now where we are experiencing a regime which is operating in an authoritarian capacity. One of the ways in which it's trying to retain its authoritarian, authority, a power center, influence over our lives is by changing the rules of the game. So again, specifically around issues of elections, we've seen, for example, one of our affiliates, in the state of Missouri, Missouri Jobs with Justice, has, double qualified a measure to challenge the redistricting effort, right? So again, we're seeing a president that knows that what he's doing is incredibly unpopular and incredibly harmful. We're seeing people react as they should, saying that they don't want these things. His reaction has been to work through, folks that he has across the country that are allied with him in that group of oligarchs to try to retain that power. And one of the things they've tried to do is redraw congressional lines. Well, in the state of Missouri, the proposed maps are now going to be decided on by voters. And so voters are going to actually be the ones who decide whether they want to have these new gamed out maps that disadvantage and disenfranchise Missourians. And we expect that people are going to reject these maps, right? Because we know that people want fair elections. We know people want free elections. We know that people want a fair economy. We know that people want a free economy, right? So these are the things that we're going to see play out and the places in which we are going to be, again, in the present day, executing and building power, but also, as I was talking about, building power toward the future. We always have elections as a vehicle for change, but once the election has been resolved, we also need to be working at, passing really great public policy and then co-governing to make sure that we are doing what we need to be doing to meeting people's needs, right? It's one thing to have something that sounds good on paper, and it's another thing for that thing to work in practice. And again, we're drawing from best practices that we've seen and things that have worked for us through the trajectory of our movement, right? We've learned from the civil rights movement. We've learned what works. We've learned how to deliver for people, how to meet their basic needs, and how to continually win progress by leapfrogging ahead, not by tinkering around the edges and like only playing for incremental change, but by understanding that people have real needs and we have to meet them in real time. And we have to give people a real vision for the future that isn't just rhetorical, but material, driven by capital, driven by resources, and driven by this idea that we retain ownership of our democracy.
What are your main challenges to get this work done? I imagine some of it has to do with, basic things like resources and just the money to be able to do them, but also disinformation. Maybe we live in a country where there's so much distortion of reality, and depending upon what media you're exposed to or what community or church you might be in, you might be getting fed a lot of disinformation and find that you're, voting against your own interest, etc. What are those main challenges that people's action faces?
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't want to be dismissive of the resources question, right? Because again, the resources are lopsided. You opened by saying, they have essentially like tip the scale in terms of like resource allocation in their favor. We retain numbers, right? We retain numbers and are able to build power around those numbers, but we build power around those numbers to free up those resources, right? There's more than enough for all of us to thrive if the billionaires and the greedy corporations and the CEOs don't hoard it, but they are hoarding it. And unfortunately, the folks that we are expecting to come through and really deliver for us haven't always done so, right? We've seen a lot of like major funders and folks that have said rhetorically, again, that they're invested in organizing, in small d democracy, in our communities, in maintaining, again, economic improvements, climate improvements. We've seen those folks, not necessarily rise up and step up to meet the moment, right? And so that's a challenge that I do think we have to be real about. The other challenge I think we do have to be real about is this administration is not a partisan administration. This administration is an authoritarian regime that is operating outside of the bounds of the Constitution, a president that has already defied the Supreme Court, that has already violated due process. We have, again, eliminated essential programs for people, throwing folks into instability, forcing states into austerity when they did not need to be in austerity, right? There's a lot of destabilizing pressures that are happening at the same time as like there are masked federal agents in the largest police force now in the world going from neighborhood to neighborhood, community to community, state to state, being aided and abetted by the National Guard and other, government actors who are meant to be servants of the people are now agents of harm for the people on a scale that is unprecedented, right? And so that assault on us, that assault on essentially our safety, our security, our livelihoods, our very lives is one which we have to, again, continue to address. And how do we address it, right? I think is probably the question underneath this. And one of the examples I can point to is from a very recent effort where we decided we wanted to go on offense on this very issue, right? We did not start off the year, with the intent of being somebody or an organization or an entity or a network that wanted to necessarily go all in again, on these issues of community protection, but then DC was invaded and LA was invaded and Chicago was invaded. And
so community protection from ICE, from National Guard, and all of the above.
Right. So as a community serving organization, as community organizers, we have to meet people where they are, and that's where they are, right? So one part of this is making sure that communities have the resources to, again, have good information to protect themselves, not only know your rights, not only like watchdog organizations, not only mutual aid, all of those things, but then also what are the opportunities that people have to go on offense against, again, these bad federal actors, right? So we've seen a role for, again, not only community leaders, but also local elected officials. And we've also seen a role for us to lead, again, against corporate players who are profiting from this system, right? We early on were identifying private prison corporations like Geo Group as bad actors in the system that were profiting from this system, getting public dollars to cause public harm. And we're very recently launched a campaign that is asking questions about the contracts that AT&T holds with DHS and CBP and ICE. And that campaign allows for us to like get AT&T on the record about the way that those contracts are being played out. And again, this is a way in which communities themselves and consumers can participate in a campaign, of advocacy. It doesn't have to be only based around immigration. It can also be based around surveillance. It can be based around a lot of questions of like, how exactly are public dollars being given to corporations in this moment, and are those things for the public benefit or not for the public benefit? And asking those questions creates opportunities for people to have conversations. Those conversations are the vehicle for which we can do the organizing that we need to do to not only, again, keep our communities safe, but also build the power we need to be in a position to win back our democracy through the electoral vehicle of the midterm elections of next year and beyond.
How does People's Action center narrative and storytelling? As the media strategy director, I imagine this is something you think about all the time.
Yeah.
But storytelling is being seen as increasingly important these days in terms of culture shaping and really creating a vision for the world that we want to live in. So I'm wondering if you can take us through how People's Action navigates that.
Yes. I mean, I want to start with what you were talking about before about misinformation and disinformation and fundamental disagreements on like what is real and what is not real, right? And that's one of the things that's been really, I think, challenging for a lot of folks that have approached, communications, assuming that if we are going to get a certain story in the paper, or if we're going to get a certain video up on YouTube, that somehow it's going to be seen by folks and it's going to be believed by folks and going to be met as a place in which we can, again, drive conversations that we need to be having. What we've been able to do through the organizing work and the deep, what we call deep canvassing, these conversations we're having where we're building common bridges across people that have a lot of disagreements around major issues, that becomes part of our narrative work as well. So what, again, the heart of our organizing is this idea that we can really connect with human beings. And then therefore the heart of our narrative work is not only battling for big ideas and really being in a place where we are redefining things, like saying, instead of coming from a place of scarcity, coming from a place in which we know that we deserve to have our basic needs met, right? We do need an economy that works for all, and we deserve an economy that works for all, right? Without any asterisks applied onto that. So that is one place that we begin to have these conversations. And again, how are we restarting these conversations in places where people can be moved to understand that what happens is actually in our hands? That is the biggest challenge of any narrative shift, right? Because what we are, through misinformation, through disinformation, through bots, through division, through a discord and a disbelief that people are experiencing, a lot of people are losing faith. And it is one thing to lose faith in a political party. It is another thing to lose faith in an institution. The worst thing that could happen is if we lost faith in ourselves. And we can't lose faith in ourselves. We have to retain the idea that we are the ones in the driver's seat in all ways and in all capacities, right? So let me make this more concrete. So again, one disparate story might be about the cost of living and how expensive groceries are. Another disparate story might be about, again, these threats to healthcare, how not only the cuts that we talked about earlier where Medicaid and Medicare and the Affordable Care Act are being defunded and undermined. But there's also a move to privatize Medicare, right? So there's an existing Medicare, and then there's this threat that Medicare Advantage is trying to privatize Medicare, right? There are, of course, all of the things we talked about with ICE, right? The way that those structures are operating, the corporations that are behind that, the private and prison contractors, the subcontractors that are going into this system, and the surveillance system that we've talked about, AT&T, Palantir, all these corporations. These are a lot of different stories, and there are a lot of different things. And so the instinct for people is to get overwhelmed, right? The bad advice that I think we got at one point was that we should be like narrowing our focus, and we should be like drilling down and trying to put blinders on for everything else except for one issue. But the truth is that the narrative work is what saves us, because the narrative work allows us to take all of these little pieces together and put them into a mosaic. So now there's one coherent story. And that one coherent story is that there are people who are trying to divide us, right? There are people who are trying to impose artificial scarcity on us that doesn't actually really exist. And those people are doing that because they are enriching themselves through our public dollars and by profiting off of our pain. And the answer is, and the answer is that we can meet them, right, and challenge them. We, the people, do retain this power to build this economy that works for all of us, to build a system that works for all of us, and that meets our basic needs: housing, healthcare, clean, reliable, and affordable energy. We are starting from where people are with their pocketbooks and their day-to-day lives, and we're connecting them to a narrative that shows them how that is actually also the ending place. It's both the starting place and the ending place. As we go through villains, and we go through corporations, and we go through oligarchs, and we bring people into the political system through political organizing, and we bring them into co-governance, we challenge them to imagine themselves as the leaders of their communities, their states, and our country. And we go back to, again, this very foundational thing. The founding fathers may not have meant we the people as all of us, but we do. And we're the ones who get to decide how this plays out.
So having that big framing, it's almost like having a grand unified theory of injustice and then
Yes.
Painting the picture of what could be possible and who the common obstacles are. Because, of course, there are common obstacles. There's billionaires, there's right-wing figures in government, and those are in cahoots with one another. And in that framework, you can put so many ideas around immigrant justice, to housing rights, to prison abolition, to college tuition and debt, right? So, and so it just definitely feels to me that it's a powerful approach. And then let's talk about what it is that, how People's Action sees itself within the broader landscape of social justice organizations, because there are many, there's tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of social justice organizations around the country, from small to big national ones like People's Action. And some of them only focus on narrow issues, and others are broad-based. How does People's Action fit, broadly speaking, in social justice terms around the country?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely.
Who are your natural allies, I should ask?
Yeah, we are in an ecosystem at all times. At all times, we're in an ecosystem. And I think that, again, one of the challenges we have for ourselves is how do we meet the moment, right? And build together, not only within our network, but again, across networks, across coalitions that are longstanding and ones that are emerging. What are things that we need to be doing to bring people together to build more power, right? Because the challenges that we face are scaled at such a degree that they can feel overwhelming, right? Again, we have to remember that one of the deliberate strategies that was employed in this first year of the Trump regime was this flooding the zone strategy, right? And so the way that you answer flooding the zone is by basically like building up enough of a levee, building up enough of something that can like resist anything that comes at it, and then begin to put an engine in it so it begins to move forward and proceeds. And one of the great things that we've done, in addition to doing things like writing up an antidote for authoritarianism 2 years ago, again, long before we were even in this first year, was really invest in what we're calling the organizing revival, what we've called the organizing revival, and what has grown to become an organizing revival network. So now it is a network built on other networks that builds in groups like Gamaliel and Popular Democracy and Right to the City and Community Change and the Fair Immigration Reform Movement. Again, all of those folks have networks and organizations and deep roots in the communities that they serve. And all together, we're not only becoming greater than the sum of our parts, but we're understanding how to be more nimble and how to pivot to include even more things and take even more things on, right? We began this conversation talking about the places where our issues have really emerged around healthcare, around housing, and around climate justice. And again, because of ICE, we've now really seen like that the intersectionality of that issue. And you pointed to higher education. All of these things really are working together at the same time, and all of our groups do have a space to take up at the same time in working within this broader context. As long as we recognize that we are an ecosystem in which all of the parts need to thrive, and as long as we recognize that, like, subtracting from one part of the ecosystem is actually going to be harmful to the entire ecosystem, I think we can, again, continue to do what we've done successfully, which is build this network of networks and this coalition of coalitions, this convening of conveners. And it's really become something that has become cross-pollinating. It's causing things to thrive. It's causing things to happen quickly. And again, like a really practical, tangible example of this is, a lot of folks may be familiar with like these campaigns that we saw at the end of this year, at the end of 2025, entering into the Thanksgiving holiday period, a lot of corporate accountability campaigns, right? So there are folks that started to say, we need to look at what Amazon and Target and Home Depot and Spotify and Starbucks and other sort of corporations are doing that are union busting and trampling on workers' rights, or walking away from DEI, or supporting, again, these attacks that are being orchestrated by ICE, CBP, DHS, and these other bad actors in our community. We're able to fold that in with our proactive, picking a fight with AT&T that nobody had named and nobody had known that they had contracts, and we unearthed those contracts, and we were able to tie all of those things together, right, through great partnerships with organized labor and faith-based organizations.
I want to thank you so much, Unai, for joining us today. Really appreciate your time. We'll post a link to People's Action from our website as well. Thank you so much. Good luck to you.
I thank you so much, Sonali, and it is up to us, and we really appreciate this opportunity to be part of this conversation.
My guest has been Unai Montes-Irueste, the Media Strategy Director for People's Action and People's Action Institute. This is Rising Up for Justice, and I'm Sonali Kolhatkar, host and executive producer of this new weekly half-hour series exclusive to viewers of Free Speech TV and subscribers of my long-standing program, Rising Up with Sonali. You can find out more at risingupwithsonali.com.